guys are in for a real treat in this video. We've got a special guest coming, my grandpa, who is at the very tip top of my short list of favorite people in the world. And we bribed him over here with some Blackberry Cobbler, which is my grandma's recipe. And if you know me, you probably know that my grandma passed away a couple years ago. So I know everybody says their grandma's pie was really good. No, you don't get it. It was amazing, and still is amazing. So anyhow, we bribed Grandpa over here with some pie, and he's going to tell some stories, hopefully, and talk to us about what it was like when he was growing up. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. These stories are my favorite on the planet, so stay tuned. But
Did your grandma use lard?
her recipe says shortening, but I'm pretty sure later in life she used lard because she did not really, she got really into health stuff later on, and she started shying away from some of that stuff. And I have a story from when I was a kid. She told me I could go get some homemade ice cream. They have made homemade ice cream all the time. So I went to go get the big bowl of homemade ice cream out of the freezer and started serving it up. And I was like, man, this seems kind of weird. And then she comes in the kitchen and she just starts laughing. She had a very distinct laugh. And I was like, what's going on, Grandma? You know, kind of like, what the heck? And she's like, that's lard, sweetheart. You don't want to eat that. So I had actually gotten the lard out of the freezer, not the ice cream. So she saved me narrowly from that. So my grandma and grandpa had 7 children. And so food was a very big part of their life. My fondest memories of my grandma were basically always, she was cooking, and it was always with love. You would come in the kitchen at basically any given point in the day, and she had made something amazing. And half the time it was out of nothing. She made soup all the time from leftovers, and it was the best soup every time you've ever had, and it was never the same. Crust on this cobbler is my favorite part of the entire thing. So anytime we would have like a family get together, she would make this, and I would wait to get mine until everybody else had gone through and served themselves, because the crust would be left on the bottom of the pan and the berry juice would soak into it. So I would go in and like scrape the crust off the bottom, and it was soaked in berry juice, and I would just eat that with homemade ice cream. It's the best part. The blackberries we're using are from our old house. This summer we froze a bunch of them, and so hopefully we'll have enough to make a handful of pies. This makes a very flaky, delicious crust.
Like when Skyler cooks.
All right, guys, this is Grandpa Nash, one of my favorite people on the whole planet. So we're just gonna pick his brain a little bit and let him tell us some stories and get it on video so we don't forget about it. So could you start with just talking about your growing up, where you grew up, and how you grew up?
I guess that'd be a good place to start.
Might as well
is at the beginning. I was born and raised in a community of Squires, Missouri, which is in the heart of the Ozarks. A lot of people, when they think of the Ozarks here, they think of Lake of the Ozarks. Well, that's not hardly the Ozarks at all. When I take you to the Ozarks, you know you've been to the Ozarks. But anyway, it's a community. Squires is a little community right on the Highway 5 south of Ava that has somehow survived a lot of the other small towns and post offices and things closing. it's still there just like it was 75 years ago plus, I suppose. And I've known probably at least 4 people that have retired from there as postmaster from that same little. There used to be a lot of little general stores and things throughout the country down there, and nearly all of them were post offices at one time. But they've about all closed except Squires. Somehow they've kept it open.
Is it just a post office now? Or?
No, it's a general store.
Oh wow!
And it's really a treat. People that I've taken down there, I always take them to Squires for the store. It's a trip, I'll tell you. They've got everything under the sun in that store.
I don't remember. Did we go down there when you took us down to see the old?
May have. I can't remember.
I don't remember.
May have. But I think you'd remember it if you were there.
Oh, yeah, I think I would. Too. Sounds like
because you go in and, like I say, they've got everything in that store, and the aisles are just this wide, and everything's just stacked. If they can find it, they've got it. It's interesting.
I wonder if they've survived so long because they're far enough away that people need to go there to get stuff.
Basically, yeah. And they supply groceries and cow feed and anything else that you might need. If you need a new lawnmower, they can get you one of those or whatever. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I was raised in that community, and we were actually 5 miles from Squires. And so we would do a little trading there, but actually most of our trade would go to Ava, for major groceries and things. But some of my earliest remembrances down there were when I was growing up was on the old farm. We lived on a sharecrop farm. It belonged to my grandfather. And
so kind of like renting almost, like
yeah, and we paid the rent with sharecrop.
Okay.
My dad, whatever. We didn't do a lot of crops because the soil just not conducive to it, rocky, But we would always grow some corn and some oats maybe, or put up a lot of hay and stuff. But Granddad always got a percentage of that for the rent, and But one thing that I remember specifically was, and you've read about my story, so some of this should be reminded. It's things, the highlights in my childhood days was when my dad always made molasses. He was a good hand at it. He had a mill, and it was a 1 horsepower mill because it took 1 horse to run it. And
that's where that measure came from, I'm sure.
And it was my dad. He was really good at making molasses. He would he'd do it every fall. He'd grow a patch of sorghum cane, and we would at the right time we would go in and strip the leaves down. It's still standing. We'd strip the leaves down all the way, and then we'd let them lay there and cure, and we'd bind those up, and those were excellent calf feed and stuff like that.
Oh wow!
We'd use those for that. And
were
then
they like high protein, or do you know?
A lot of sugar.
Okay. Yeah.
High in sugar. I'm sure they were high protein. Yeah. We didn't know how to check that those days.
Yeah.
But if the calves got fat on them, we knew it was good.
Do they think they just tried it and they liked it, so they knew it was good to go?
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. And back in those days, we used everything. We didn't waste anything.
Yeah.
And but anyway, then we'd cut the cane, and we'd haul it down to the mill and grind it or run it through the rollers and press the juice out of it.
It was just kind of like smash it.
Yeah, 2 great big steel rollers.
Okay.
Ran together like this on gears, and the horse, he's going around in a circle, and he learns his job, and you never had to say anything to him, just whoa and go.
Yeah. Turn them on and off.
And he actually would do that so much he would just make a rut in the ground. He'd be down this low, where he walked. But it was an interesting time, and it always fun. My dad, he was very particular how he made. A lot of people made molasses, but a lot of them they weren't that good when they got in with it. But he had several big pans, I want to call them, maybe seemed like they're almost as wide as this table. Metal pans about 6 inches deep, and he had like 3 of those, I think, down through there. And you'd have one, and you have a pipe that went into the next one, and the pipe went into the next one.
Yeah.
And and these fires down here underneath all this.
This is all outside.
Yeah, all outside. And he'd cook those molasses in this first pan, and he would. Then there's always a lot of scum and stuff comes up on these molasses, so he'd skim all that off, toss it away, and then it goes into the next one where there'd be a little less of it, and the next one he'd cook that, and he'd skim that one off, and then he'd go into the third one for his finest molasses. And when it come out of that, my dad always said, unless he could put it in a glass jar, and if you couldn't read a newspaper through it, it wasn't good. It was really good.
So did he kept all 3 pans, but the final pan was the best one?
No, he just kept
that was just the end of the process.
That was just the finished product.
I got you.
And most people wouldn't mess with cooking them that much. And that
probably just do one pot.
Took quite a long time to do that.
Do they just do like one pot usually?
Yeah. And that's where you get the blackstrap molasses.
Yeah.
You know, you can get now blackstrap molasses has a use. In those days, you could, if you wanted to keep those blackstrap molasses, they were good to put on any kind of cow feed. That if you put up some hay that really wasn't very good quality or anything like it, just put some of that on there, and the cattle would eat it like honey.
Sure.
And but anyway, that was always a highlight in the fall of the year. And then they'd have this big pile of this. We call them plummies. I don't know why we call them that, but the canes after the juice was pressed out.
Mm-hmm.
They'd pile them over here. We'd have a pile, seemingly like probably 10, 12 feet high, and 16 foot across maybe or something. And we would play on them. I mean, it was a lot of fun. We'd get up there and play on those things.
How much molasses do you think you would get out of something like that?
Oh, I can't remember, but my dad would just fill jug after jug after jug. And then he had a little metal can that had a lid that fit tight on it. It was probably, I'm going to say it was half gallon, maybe. And he'd fill a lot of those, and he'd put a label on it and tell him what it was. And then he would, a lot of times my dad would go to town to Ava on Saturday. He'd take a bunch of those with him, and he'd always sell everything he had.
Make it worth his trip to
People
town.
found out he was in town, they'd look him up for those molasses. And there was a lot, like I say, there was a lot of people, or several people around the country that made molasses, but he was famous for his molasses. And still today, I'd love to have a can of those things.
Oh, man.
And my mom, she'd make big molasses cookies, and we'd always have a big, nice molasses cookie or two in our lunchbox. I could trade those for anything and anybody had. That was my trading.
You weren't too enthusiastic about the rest of your lunch. You could let go of a cookie.
I could get an orange or an apple or anything for a molasses
That's
cookie.
hilarious. It's closing back up. It's not ready yet.
So anyway, then I suppose.
So did your dad? So he was just farmed and whatnot to make his living?
We dairied. We had dairy cows. We milked cows. Nearly everybody in that country in those days milked cows.
Sure.
Some less than others.
Yeah.
But that was your income to keep your groceries and your kids with shoes and
sure. Yeah. Because you kind of had to have something you could turn into cash.
Yes. Really.
You make a lot of your own stuff, but you had to have cash.
Exactly. And I went to school at the Fry School, Frye School. It's named after a family friend of mine. And it was just one big building. I called it big. It probably wouldn't even look big now today. But it was one large building, and it had a partition. It was a portable partition right in the middle of it. It had four classes in one room and 4 classes in the other. I went up to the 8th grade. And that's where I went 8th grade through the 8th grade of school there. And that partition, I remember when we'd have like a Christmas program or something like that could be removed, and you'd have this one big area.
Sure.
And worked out pretty good that way. And I remember, a lot of times we walked to school, like the story goes, uphill both ways. Yeah. And that's almost true because this one way that we went, there was two pretty good sized hills. So regardless how you went, you were going uphill.
Yeah.
And but the thing that I remember that
and there was hills everywhere down there.
Oh, absolutely. It's
all hills.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it rained a lot, we couldn't use that. That was 1.25 miles if we went that way. It was 1.25 miles. But there was a couple of pretty good ditches or creeks that if it rained a lot, you couldn't get across.
Sure.
So a lot of times we'd go around the road, and the road was a little longer, maybe a half mile farther. But there was only one ditch there that we had to worry about. But sometimes if it rained a bunch, you couldn't get through it. So sometimes the older boys, would come along and take us with their horses, and when we get to that, they'd let us cross with a horse.
If they knew it had been raining a lot, they'd come check on you or something.
Yeah, and take us through on the horses, and generally those places they run down pretty quick, so they don't stay up.
Sure.
Down there is real common to ford a lot of creeks.
Yeah.
I mean, very few of those creeks had bridges or concrete or anything.
Well, when I've been down that way, there's the main creeks will have water in them because they're the lowest spot, but a lot of those kinds of creeks, the water hits it and runs off and it's gone.
Oh yeah.
Real quick.
Yeah. That's true. And
so when you went to school, how many people rode a horse to school?
not very many that I remember, just a couple maybe.
One
boy that I remember later on in the years when I went, he rode his horse, and occasionally some of the people lived pretty close, and they'd occasionally, but just a couple that did it most of the time.
Sure.
And we, like I say, we just used the horses when it was necessary.
Yeah. Because they usually probably had a job at home.
Exactly. Yeah. They generally were being used for something. But anyway, we our world was pretty small, real small. And I had never been very far from home at all. Although whenever I was in, I guess I was 8 years old, maybe 8. My uncle bought a larger farm, which would be considered a large farm in those days. Now it wouldn't be in it. 400 acres.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a big farm back then. Yeah,
and
that's lots of hills.
And lots of hills, lots of timber, lots of everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was pretty excited about it because my uncle wanted my dad to come over and live on it and manage it at a nicer house, bigger, nice barn and outbuildings. Pretty nice setup. So we went over there, and but the thing that these boys would probably kind of like to hear. We had that year that we just lived there 1 year, but that year we had what they call a locust year. You know what a locust is? Well, a lot of people says nowadays that grasshoppers are locusts, and I guess they're a form of locust. But there's another locust that comes through and gets on your trees and will just eat the leaves right off of your trees or anything else it can find. They're called pharaoh locusts.
Wonder why they got that name.
Exactly. And I mean, gazillions of them. When they come in like that, like what I'm talking about, it was the only time it ever happened. And they'd make so much noise you couldn't hear it thunder. I mean, and if you listen to them with a little imagination, you could hear them saying Pharaoh.
Yeah,
they got that.
Yeah.
And we had cattle, of course, and had a lot of this timbered pasture, and the cows would always come in. Don't forget that pie, Dad.
They're so worried about that pie. I don't blame them.
Yeah, the cows would always come in for us to milk them, in the evening and be there every morning. But whenever in the summertime, whenever the grass got good, they didn't much care if they came in or not. So it was up to us boys to go round them up wherever they were at and bring them in. Well, golly, you couldn't find them. You couldn't hear them.
Oh, because they had a bell on.
We put a bell on one or two, and that's the only way you had to get within 100 yards of them to hear them. These things just drive you nuts.
Sure.
And I remember we had my dad at that year, he had a patch of wheat right north of the house. And those locusts got so thick in that wheat, and I think they destroyed it. But I remember they would be on a fence post so you couldn't hardly see the post. There'd be so many. They just on everything.
Was that hard? Did it damage a lot of people's crops?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for the year.
It did. Yeah, it did. But that's the only time I ever remember having them at that, that level,
Sure.
that many, kind of like a plague.
I think they talked about that here in the last year or two that was supposed to happen somewhere, but I don't know where.
Yeah, I don't think it happens. They used to say, the old timers would say every 7 years, but I don't think that's necessarily true.
I certainly
Might be
haven't seen it.
every 7 years somewhere.
Yeah. I certainly haven't seen it ever in my life.
But anyway, we had an opportunity to go to Illinois and work in the canneries up there. It started out, my mom and we were just really needing to make some money.
Sure.
We were just not doing well at all. And so my mom said, well, I'll take Maxine, which was my cousin who was living with us, and one of the boys, Elroy, and go to Illinois, and I'll work out, and Jess, my dad, and the kids can stay here and take care of the farm.
Sure.
And maybe can pick up a few $100s. Anyway, so she did that. That was in 47, I believe.
So how old would you have been then?
I was pretty young. I was like 7.
Mm.
And so she went and did that, and like I say, she saved her money. She made, my gosh, she made 60 cents an hour. She should have saved a ton. 60s cutting asparagus.
I wonder. Okay, so she was harvesting near the cannery.
Yeah.
I wonder. I might sit down and try to run the numbers on that and see what that would be adjusted for inflation. I would be curious to know.
60 cents an hour, but it was where we lived. I mean, you couldn't get a job, so anything was better.
Sure.
And so she worked from I think she went out there asparagus comes off pretty early. One of the first things, April, May.
Early spring, yeah.
And she'd worked the asparagus, and the guy that she worked for, he had some housing for the people that worked for him, and they could live there free. It was just like barracks.
Sure. Real simple.
Yeah. And so then whenever the asparagus cutting was over, why they were harvesting peas in town, which is a different company totally.
Sure.
But they made an arrangement some way that they could stay living in those barracks where they were, and they could work in town. So she went into the factory and worked in for Del Monte, so it was, to can peas and then corn. And well, she didn't stay later on. I did stay for lima beans and pumpkins, but they would can all 4 of those. But she just stayed with peas and corn, and they come home. They came on back. Well, and then the next, I kind of have a hard time remembering just how this sequence of this, but I think it was the next year. Well, she decided that was a pretty good deal, so we arranged to put our cattle over on another piece of property to a guy to pay some pasture rent.
Sure.
And leave them there and just shut everything down and all of us go.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was down there.
Okay.
And
So
10. No, I was 10.
he was your age.
I was 10. I was born in 38, and that was 48. So I was 10 years old. Now my brother was 12, just older than me, and they would let him work a half a day.
Oh wow.
Child labor.
Yeah.
But he could pay him 60 cents an hour, just like everybody, but only a half a day at a time. So he worked a half a day. My mom worked, my dad worked, and 2 other boys worked. And so all together they made a little money, and they kind of pooled their money, saved some money a little bit, and then they worked through, like say, through the corn, and it wasn't a real ideal setup because I was, like I say, 10 years old, and I was
on your own.
and there were several boys and girls my age
Yeah.
at the camp that had nobody to watch them.
Oh sure.
Except there was a couple old grannies around
Keep
that
an
done
eye
a
on
pretty
you.
good job, best they could, of watching us and keeping us in.
Make sure you didn't get too out of hand.
Yeah. And so anyway, that fall then, when we left there, we decided we would go through Iowa, where a bunch of our relatives lived, and we hired this guy to take us in his car over to Iowa, and then he was going on to Ava.
So you didn't have a car when you were there?
No, that's something I didn't mention. My folks never had a car when I was growing up.
Yeah.
They had one earlier, and the Depression hit, and I guess they just figured they couldn't afford it, so they let it go. So So anyway, we did that, and we came on back. Well, then when we came back, my uncle he'd sold the farm where we lived. That's the reason we moved to start it. Anyway, and so we moved back in the old house.
Sure, your grandpa's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really enjoyed there, boys, was I always had some traps set, some steel traps, and some box traps. For rabbits, I caught rabbits in box traps, and I'd catch skunks,
Yeah.
or possums mostly in my steel traps.
Mm.
And I would always run those before I went to school. Of the morning early, I'd run those, and then I'd run them of the night, generally. And but I had to get it done, and I had a couple of cows to milk always
Before school.
before school. So
Did
you had to
you,
get up and get going.
when you ran your trap line, did you have a rifle with you?
Normally had a .22 rifle. Yeah, I always carried a rifle. Yeah.
And how old were you when that was?
I think I was pretty small. I started running my little trap lines when I was probably 12. About when we came back on that second go round, I think about when I started running my traps.
What do you think the most valuable pelt you ever got from your trap line was?
Probably $1.50.
What would that have been? What kind of animal?
Been a skunk.
Oh yeah.
A skunk was worth more if you could stand it.
Oh man.
If
That's
you,
how it always is. The stinky works.
if you were good enough to get up on one and kill him before he let his prey go, then he wasn't too bad. You could manage it.
Yeah.
But if he ever got,
You make you get every cent of that $1.50.
Yeah. But a black skunk was worth more than an opossum. He was only worth 75 cents or something. But trapped rabbits, we would actually there was a market for the meat for rabbits in those days.
Yeah.
I don't know where they were going, but they bought them for meat, and we would trap a rabbit. Of course, we would take his insides out,
Sure.
and field dress him, they call it, and then hang him up and let him. Most of the time, it was cold weather where he would freeze,
Oh yeah.
And then we'd get
take them into town.
Yeah, we'd get enough of them. We'd be going to town. We'd take them with us, and they'd bring from, depending on the rabbit, the size and how you handled it, 35 cents to 50 cents a piece.
For just the meat or the pelt and the meat?
The whole thing, and I
Okay.
don't know what they done with the pelt. They may not. They may.
It's
or
kind of
may-
hard to skin a rabbit.
Yeah,
Get
they
to it
may or
yourself.
may not have even used the pelt. I don't know.
Sure.
But anyway, that was always something that was kind of exciting to run your traps and take something out of your traps. And but then we came back to the old farm, and by then but that was then in 1954. 54. 53, I guess I graduated from 8th grade. And so I started going to high school, freshman high school, and I had there was a bus that came within a quarter of a mile of our place. So I only had to walk a quarter of a mile.
That's a good deal.
That was a good deal for me. But then that bus took us to another bus where the Blacktop Road came. He picked up several kids on it, and he dropped us off there, and we got on the big bus and went into Ava. And so I was, I guess I was 14, and it was in March, kind of cold and blustery day, and we came home, and I got on the little bus from the big bus, and this guy told me, he said, "Jerry, your house burned today." And in those days, everything we owned was in our house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically
Everything. All your food you worked to put up.
All of her all mom's canned stuff and everything was in the house. Anyway, oh man, I
You
hated
didn't have house insurance, did you?
Oh no,
That wasn't a thing.
I just remember that. I just hated to go home, but I needed to go home. And I felt so sorry for my mother. I mean, I just thought, man, what would that must, because I knew my dad wasn't there. He was over working for a guy. And anyway, I had to got off that bus, and I had to kind of go over a rise before And I never will forget going over that rise, and all there is a pile of ashes. and it was, like I say, it's spring of the year. And so my brother had a house just a mile down the road.
And that was your older brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was in the military.
Okay.
And it was a pretty decent, it's a little house, but it's pretty decent and livable. So we moved down there, and then we would come up and do the milking and all that. And at the same time, we were starting to the people helped us out. They pitched in money, and some donated labor, and actually built us a house, 24 by 24, 4 rooms.
Yeah.
And but it was livable, you know. And so anyway, at that time, it just seemed like it was more important for me to stay home and help my dad than it was to go to school. Today, that's sad. I hate that I never finished high school.
Yeah.
But I dropped out of school and stayed home, and we built the house and did whatever farming we were doing. And then that was in '54, and we had 3 years of super bad drought, back to back.
Gosh.
Terrible times. I'll never forget that. And I remember saying when I was in that stage, if I ever get out of this place, I'll never come back.
But now you have a lot of fond memories.
Yeah, I do. But oh man, it was tough times.
Yeah.
Tough times.
That's hard.
I remember my dad had corn. He always had to have a patch of corn because he had to feed his hogs and his horses corn.
Sure.
And I remember that corn got up there about this tall, about ready to toss on it. Just no rain, it just dried up. And about all the live springs, you know, people depended on springs down there for their cattle.
Yeah.
About all of them dried up. We had one down in the holler, we called it, which it was in the holler. And it was not a very strong spring, but it never quit.
Is this the one that I got to see?
Probably
that came out.
was.
You said it came out of the stone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't hardly even find it last time I done it,
Yeah,
but it's there.
Yeah.
If
You
a
could tell
person-
it was damp.
Yeah, a person would excavate some of that stuff away. Well, hi there.
She heard Grandpa and smelt some pie, I bet.
And but our neighbor, he drove his cattle out to our place once a day to drink there at that little spring. And if you had a spring like that, it was pretty precious, I'll tell you.
Yeah, water.
And that's where we got our drinking water.
Yeah.
That's where it came from, all the water we used. And when my mom would want to wash, she washed with an old
You ever seen one of those
scrub
before?
board. You ever know what you've seen? And she'd heat her water in a great big old iron kettle this big, sitting out in the yard, build a fire in it, fill that kettle, heat her water, then get her wash tub out, and that's the way she did her washing. Well, a lot of times it was my job to get the horse, didn't use a wagon, hook him on a sled, just had a small sled, take 2 or 3 milk cans, which would hold 10 gallons each, and go down. It was down, and get them full of water, which would take
You
quite a
had to
while
dip it out, right?
because it was slow. It didn't. You had to kind of wait on it. But I'd get those and get her water and back up the hill and she'd do her washing. Everything was hard. Nothing was easy.
Everything took time.
Everything was done.
Took tons of time.
But anyway, like you say, memories really, and good ones for that matter. But
I remember you telling a story about your mom was able to eventually save up for a powered washer.
That was the dream of her life. She to get something that would, be a power washer. So she seen this when Montgomery Ward had this gasoline powered washer, and you had to. It's like a motorcycle. You had to kick it to start it. You had to have a thing that you step on, and had a little one-cylinder engine on it. Well, she got this. I had no idea what it cost, but I know she did everything in the world she could do to raise a dime. She even got down to where she just liked a few dollars, having enough to pay for it. So she hated to do this, but she picked out a few old hens that she didn't think was very productive and went and sold them.
Oh wow!
And anyway, she paid for that washer, and that was Mom's washer. I'm telling you, she got
probably improved her life.
Oh
a
my
lot.
gosh! Yeah,
Saved so much time.
Oh my gosh! Yes. And I was so glad for her. He said, find me a good chunk of cedar. So, okay, I'm down there, and I know where there's a cedar mill at. I mean, that's what they do.
Oh wow.
So I just pulled in there and stopped, man. They've got cedar bolts everywhere. And I asked this guy, I said, I'm looking for a chunk of cedar. He said, well, just go over and pick you out one. And I said, fine. And he said, just get it, it's free. And so I took them, I had it squared it up. It was probably a 5x5, maybe 6x6, maybe this long. That's the way they wanted it. So I took that to him. I said, he wanted to make some lures.
Oh.
And cedar, a lure will float.
Okay.
And so anyway, he wanted to do that. So I said, do you think this will
You can make some lures with that?
He laughed. He said, I think I'd probably do. So I didn't say nothing. He didn't say anything. Well, one day here he come with a nice lure made out of that cedar wood. I mean, it's a nice one. And painted and everything.
Oh wow.
And I've still got it.
That's cool. Did you ever try fishing with it, or is it just like to look at?
I can't remember if I did or if I was afraid I'd lose it, and I just kept it.
That would be a shame.
I've still got it. And it probably worked fine.
Huh.
But I never will forget that. I thought, this ought to keep you busy for a while.
That's hilarious. We've got, I didn't think we had any hedge on our piece really to speak of, but I realized we went for a little walk the other day on some part we hadn't really been on yet, and between the pond and the road there's actually quite a bit. So once we get the house built and everything, I want to go over there and get a bow stave, get a bow made with the boys. That's about the best bow wood out there.
Yeah.
What was that story you said to
remind you? I was going to tell the boys this berry story.
Come here, Lou.
Down where I was raised up on the farm, there was blackberries everywhere. I mean, there were just any place you wanted to go, there were blackberries. Well, there was a man that decided he would capitalize on that, started commercially buying blackberries. You pick them, take them to him. He'd process them, and he had a market. He created a market for them. So you could sell blackberries for 50 cents a gallon.
Oh, wow.
A gallon of blackberries, 50 cents. And so me and my brother, we wanted to get going in the cow business. We wanted some cows. So my mom said she had an old cow that was going to have a calf, and it had twin calves, twin heifers. And she said she'd sell us one of those, but she didn't give it to us. She said, $5. So we had to pick 5 gallons of blackberries to pay for that pie. So
10 gallons, that's 50 cents a gallon, right?
10 gallons, I'm sorry, 5 gallons each.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Yeah, and so we picked 10 gallons of blackberries. That's a lot of blackberries, boys. I'm telling you, 10 gallons is.
Probably getting all cut up and scraped up the whole time.
That's 3,010,000 jiggers.
Jiggers?
Little red things that get on you and just.
We say when you go to pick them, you've got jiggers before.
Make you want to scratch like a dog.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
But anyway, we were so happy to do that, and we bought this little calf. One of the calves was solid red, and one came out spotted with white spots on it. Well, we liked the one, was pretty one with the white spots. So we took it. And sometimes whenever they have twins that way, that one of them won't reproduce. One of them will never have a baby for some reason or other. It's real common. Real common. And just so happened that ours, she was able to have a calf and reproduce, and we kept her as a cow. The other one never would have a calf. So anyway, that's the story of the blackberries and then this man, we sold him a lot of blackberries. My folks did. I mean, we picked blackberries, and then he decided he also could market tomatoes. So my dad always thought he had to have a big tomato patch. Well, especially when he got this market going, he always thought he had to go up in what he called new ground. That's ground that hadn't been cultivated before. Maybe it had trees on it, but he would clean them off, whatever it took. And the ground is always richer there because you've got rotten leaves and rotten, you've got virgin soil, they call it. So he'd have a place like that. He'd put his tomatoes, and you wouldn't have to fertilize them. They'd just grow because the ground's fertile. So he went up there on the hill, and I forget, it seemed like an awful big patch to me. It probably wouldn't be that big if I'd go look at it today, but when you're doing everything by hand.
Yeah, clearing trees by hand and then all of that.
And the only way you could plow the ground up was with a single shovel plow. That means one plow with a horse, because there's so many roots and everything. you just break another plow up. So he got it all tore up, and we planted tomatoes, and had a really good tomato crop. It's up on the plateau from our place, and so it come time to harvest tomatoes, and we was going to haul them over this guy and make some money. And so we had a frame on the wagon that the horses pull. I guess I'm going to say it's 7 foot wide or 8 foot wide by 12 foot long, maybe, something like that. And so anyway, we take that over there, and we're picking up tomatoes in crates. We had wooden crates about this big, about that big, and we'd fill that tomatoes about that deep. So we had that stacked too high, all on this wagon frame.
That's probably 40 crates or better.
Several dollars worth of tomatoes.
Yeah.
And got it all ready to go, and the horses got spooked.
You know what that means?
And away they went down the hill, and went through this gate that you had to be careful to drive them through this gate. But they hit it. They got it all right. But they got down. They had to make a turn, and that wagon frame came off. There went the tomatoes scattered all over the hillside.
Oh man, probably ruined a lot of them. I'm sure.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, it did. Told you couldn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, the biggest thing, my poor dad, the horses just tore their harness. They got leather harness, and just tore them all to pieces. And this one mare that was crazy, we found her clear at the south end of the place, which is a mile.
Oh my goodness.
Standing against the fence, shivering, and she didn't have.
Got herself all worked up.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, this took Dad. He lost all these tomatoes, plus it took him for 3 days to patch his harness back up.
Goodness gracious.
Oh, it wasn't funny at the time, I assure you, but he was one angry man. But
He probably wanted to eat that horse.
oh, he threatened to kill her and everything, And that mare, she would do that. She would just do that. She'd done that several times. I would have killed her, or I'd have got rid of her. But anyway, not him. He'd raised her from a colt. This guy, you'd take him tomatoes, and he'd buy the tomatoes, and they canned them right there. Boy, he had a little factory. My dad even set up a factory to can tomatoes.
Oh wow.
This was before my time.
Wow.
I can't remember that, but the old building was still there on the farm that he used to can tomatoes.
So how would that work? Would he just have himself a few pressure canners and just can them up?
No, I don't know how he did it. The guy that was buying them over there that we sold to, he had his operation, his capper, he had metal cans with lids, and his capper was all run with a gasoline engine powered somehow. I don't remember just how it all worked, but
Sure.
But it wasn't. They didn't do it by hand,
Mm-hmm.
But they had to, had to cut those tomatoes and then clean them good, and throw out the bad, and then they washed them real good. And he had this thing set up right on a spring branch. It was just cold, clear water running through there. So he's bringing that water up with a pump and using all that water
To clean everything.
and then he knew who to get in touch with, how he marketed these. I don't know, but he sold them.
Wow.
His name was Bailey Burton. This guy's name was. And so anyway, any way to make a little money, because money was hard to come by.
Well, and you had to buy the stuff you couldn't grow or make yourself. And
Exactly.
what kind of stuff would your mom buy that you guys couldn't make yourself?
Well, generally her shopping to the grocery store would be flour. Although now my dad, I remember I went to the mill with him several times with corn and ground our own cornmeal.
Mm-hmm.
This guy would grind it. The guy that had the mill, he would grind it on the shares. You could give him part of the meal, and for his fee, or you could pay him so much and
Keep it all.
But now she would buy flour and sugar. Although sugar was rationed, do you know what rationed means? It was scarce to get, and the government had. It was during the war, in the Second World War, the big war with Germany, and that they rationed sugar. They rationed sugar, and they rationed rubber for tires. Couldn't hardly buy tires.
They would give out like stamps.
Coupon, or stamps. And if you got a ration for 5 pounds of sugar, that had to last you so long because you didn't get any more that month or whatever. You had to make that last. So my mother would use molasses a lot to sweeten stuff with. And I remember one year there was a place that was kind of an old deserted place that had a lot of pear trees. And pears don't require much sugar, you know, they're sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So man, we canned pears like there wasn't ever going to be another pear.
Sure.
And they were good.
Yeah, because she didn't like buy jelly. She would can all
No,
that
no,
stuff.
oh no, never.
Yeah.
She didn't.
And you didn't have
been awful about jelly.
Yeah, she would think that was
We
sacrilege.
canned peaches and we canned apples and we canned pears if they were available. Now sometimes they wouldn't be available, but if they were there, you went and got them canned. And now listen to this. This sounds like a real story. My mother had a goal that she thought she had to have 100 jars, half gallons, not quarts.
Oh my gosh.
Half gallons, because we had a lot of them now.
Yeah.
100 half-gallon of blackberries. That was her goal, and she normally seen to it that we had them. That's a lot of
And
blackberries.
when your house burnt, she lost all of that.
Yeah. Now there probably wasn't that many up there,
Sure.
but they were all in the
Because you
attic.
had eat through them. So
They were all in the attic because that was the only place that she could keep them from freezing.
because the heat would go up.
And she said my mother stood and cried, and she said that I did pretty good till I could hear those jars popping and busting.
Man. So did you guys have electricity at that house?
Not the old house. Never. We got electricity in. It's after the new house was built. I want to say it was 55, maybe. And I know my folks, they just didn't know if they could ever afford to have it because it's going to be $3 a month.
Yeah.
$3 minimum was what they charged, and they just didn't know if they could afford that or not. But they had, and basically what we had was one light bulb in each room and one plug-in.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have anything electric. Why did you need plug-ins?
Sure.
I didn't have a fan.
So how did you guys keep like your meat and your butter and your milk and things like that?
Salt cured the meat, salt cured, hung it down in the smokehouse, and our butter. If we kept it any length of time, we had a container. We'd put it in that container, and had actually a jug type thing, but you could put that butter down there, and then we take it down and put it in the spring branch and keep it cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably ate through your butter about as you made it.
We did pretty much, yeah. We kept it pretty fresh. But the milk, if we was going to have milk or cream, we'd have to put it down in the spring, and it'd keep it pretty. And the cream would come to the top. You know?
Sure. Did you put it in the spring in the winter, or were you able to keep it in the house?
No, you could keep it in the wintertime. That wasn't the problem. But
Yeah.
in the summertime,
Sure.
and now there's people that were a little more fortunate. Maybe would have a spring or a well close to the house, and they would build what they call a well house. And they'd have a place in there where they could set their milk cans in.
Oh.
And have cold water. That was
Because that water would be like 60 degrees or something, probably.
Yeah. Some wells. My granddad had a well he was lived a mile south of us, and he had a well that was only like 35 feet deep, and the water was just ice cold coming out of there.
We just got back from a trip here a month or two ago, and there's a spring coming out of this hill, and it came out of not really a cave, but it was just a little hole in the side of the hill, and it was when it was still real hot outside, and you put your hand just by the water, and it felt like an air conditioning vent. The cold air was just falling out of that, and I mean that water was ice cold. If you sat in too long, you'd be in trouble. It was so cold.
Yeah, that's the way most of the spring water is down there. It's cold.
Yeah. Even
we'd go swimming in August, and it'd be hot, but man, you get in that water and it was cold. That water was, and I was baptized. I was baptized in that cold water when I was about 12.
It really meant something to get baptized if you're getting baptized in the cold spring water.
I was about 12 or 13 years old, and there was a preacher came to our old school, our school was a school during the week and a church on the weekend and a community building anytime it was needed.
Sure, because the community probably built the school, right? And they would kind of use it for all different sorts of things.
And that building's still there. It blew away in the tornado in 1957.
I remember that story.
That's another story.
We've heard that
and
one.
I wonder today, I've thought about the lady that was a teacher there. She was such a heroine for what she did. I wonder if there's a record of that in the archives. And
There
maybe
needs to
there
be
should be.
There needs to be a monument or something somewhere.
Needs to be. Some people need to be remembered of that because she did a marvelous thing there. I mean, tell you, that everybody in that schoolhouse could have been destroyed.
Yeah.
And they built it back pretty much just exactly like it was.
Did tornadoes don't happen in those hilly areas
Not that
too often?
Nobody knew of a tornado like of that caliber ever coming through there. The only way she said she knew that she'd heard that they sound like a train, and she knew there was no trains in that area.
Yeah, you would know.
So she went ahead and she had a little coupe car. I mean, small.
Oh, so like just a 2-seater.
And I think I've got this right. I think she put 13 kids and crammed them in that car, and she had to go 3/4 of a mile around to the nearest guy that had a cellar. Now there you could cut right across the field 1/4 of a mile. So she sent the big kids that could run across the field, and she crammed 13 little kids in that car and got them all to safety.
Because there was a
And
tornado.
it blew that schoolhouse to splinters. And people were scared to death. My brother had kids there, and he heard about the tornado and all, and it hit the school and they couldn't get to the school because all the roads were closed.
Oh, man.
Just drove
You didn't
people
have
nuts. Till
You didn't have a phone. You couldn't call up and say, what was going
no
on.
cell phone, no nothing.
That tornado was snapping trees off. Big trees.
Oh my goodness, yeah. There was oak trees in that schoolyard that had been there many years. I mean, they're huge, and it just hit it dead on. And
like that big oak tree we had down there.
Yeah, it snapped them off. Can you imagine how big of a tornado that would be?
yeah, it was a tough one. It was
Like those tornadoes that can, you can't, you can only see it tearing up stuff, but you can't see the actual tornado.
Well, it would. You probably see it coming a mile away because it would have whole trees in it. She saved a lot of lives that day.
So how many kids did she have to leave behind?
oh, there's
She didn't
I'm
leave
gonna
any
guess probably 20 kids.
So she put all the little kids in her car and drove them, and then the big
Sent
kids.
the bigger kids across
She knew
the
they
field.
could make it, so she told them to run.
And yeah, she used a lot of wisdom in that because she had no idea. She could have panicked and
Yeah,
did.
lost her wits, and it would have been bad.
And but then I don't think they ever had school in that building when they built it back. They transferred them all to Ava. So Ava has really a large school now because they
consolidated it.
sent all those consolidated areas into Ava.
Yeah. I watched a video the other day of a guy got to go tour an Amish schoolhouse, and they still do school the same way. They have a one-room schoolhouse, and they even had a partition, just like you were talking about, that they could move temporarily.
You bet.
And they use it the exact same way. They have school there, but then they would have events and stuff there, and
Very practical.
they do it the same
Very
way.
practical.
Yeah. And the guy, it was very funny because the guy interviewing the Amish fella was really concerned about how could the little kids and the older kids be in the same, area at the same time. And he's like, there's no problem. He's like, the older kids help the littler kids learn, and the little kids, they all works together.
You bet.
That's the way it's been that way for a long time.
I know sometimes in our school, whenever the teacher would get more to do than he could do, or she, whoever it was,
Sure.
they would maybe have one or two of the older kids take this class and teach these kids.
Yep.
And back in those days, see, when my sister Esther, when she graduated out of high school, she went 1 year. They called it Teachers College in Springfield, SMS, at a program called Teachers College, and they were training to be teachers. She went 1 year, and she was able to teach lower class up to 4th grade, I think it was.
Sure.
So she taught a couple of years there at high school.
Well, and if you're an older kid and you can teach little kids, then you really know what it is you're teaching. So you've learned it really well. That's a good way to prove that you've learned it. I think it's kind of funny now because we put all the same age kids in a room together, and they're all learning from each other what to do, and they're learning bad ideas from their schoolmates. You know what I mean? But with that situation, you have more responsible kids that can kind of help look out for them and make sure that they're doing the right thing and stuff. It's interesting.
Bye.